There is a specific kind of discomfort that only exists in professional sports when a coach or executive leaves a situation thinking they are heading somewhere better, and then watches the team they left behind start glowing up immediately. It is not failure exactly. It is timing. The specific cruelty of timing that makes every subsequent headline from your old city feel like a question directed personally at the decision you made. Kevin Stefanski is living that story right now, and it is only going to get louder as the 2026 season approaches. While Stefanski was in Atlanta getting his draft class picked apart by Mel Kiper, NFL Network, and multiple publications calling it a disappointing haul that did not meet the expectations attached to his arrival, Andrew Barry was in Cleveland getting praised from virtually every direction. 4 players with first-round grades across 2 days. A draft class that multiple analysts described as looking less like a real draft and more like a mock draft simulator, where all the pieces fall exactly where you need them. A front office that was questioned for years executing a single weekend with a precision and a coherence that has people around the league recalibrating their assessment of where Cleveland is heading. The contrast is not subtle. It is not the kind of thing that gets dismissed with a shrug and filed away as an interesting April footnote. It is the kind of contrast that follows a coach to his new city every single week, because NFL fans are undefeated when it comes to keeping score on exactly these situations. And the scoreboard right now reads Cleveland by a significant margin. Stefanski thought he was leaving questions behind. He may have left right before the answers started arriving. The full picture of what Cleveland accomplished in this draft only becomes clear when you look at the trades and the picks together rather than in isolation. Because what Barry constructed over 2 days was not a collection of individual decisions. It was the completion of a multi-year chess game that his critics had been misreading from the beginning. Start with the Jacksonville trade from last year, when Cleveland moved out of a top pick and came away with what felt at the time like a fragmented collection of future assets. The reaction in certain corners of Browns media and national coverage was predictably skeptical. They could have had Travis Hunter. They gave up premium real estate for pieces. The trade was questioned, the logic was interrogated, and the people who were most vocal about their skepticism were not exactly rushing to update their takes when the board came together the way Barry planned. That Jacksonville trade just returned Casey Compton in the first round, a Paul Hornung Award winner, a player with first-round grades on multiple evaluators' boards, a weapon whose versatility and proven SEC production represent exactly the kind of first-round value Cleveland was positioning to acquire when it made the original trade. Barry was not guessing when he made that deal. He was building toward a specific outcome through a specific sequence of moves, and the sequence completed exactly as designed. That is not luck. That is organizational intelligence operating over a longer time horizon than most of the people evaluating it were willing to credit. Then came Denzel Boston. Boston was projected as a first-round player throughout the entire draft process. Multiple boards had him going on day 1. He should not have been available when Cleveland's second-round pick arrived. But the San Francisco 49ers used their early second-round selection on a player who by most accounts was a dramatic reach. A pick that Daniel Jeremiah and others questioned immediately, which created the specific cascade that allowed Boston to slide far enough for Barry to grab him at a position on the board, where first-round caliber talent simply does not appear in normal circumstances. Cleveland did not create that gift, but they were positioned and prepared to receive it when it fell, which is the part of good drafting that gets undervalued because positioning sounds less impressive than execution. Organizations that have done the preparation correctly can capitalize on unexpected value when it appears. Organizations that have not done the work watch those opportunities slide to someone else because they were not ready to move. Barry moved. Emmanuel McNeil Warren from Toledo was sitting at number 15 on Jeremiah's best available board when Cleveland grabbed him at pick 58. 15 versus 58. That gap represents the specific kind of organizational alpha that compounds over time. When you consistently acquire players at a significant discount to their evaluated value, the cumulative effect on roster quality is enormous. Cleveland added a safety who was being discussed as a potential first-round talent and paid a second-round price for him. That is the kind of transaction that front offices with genuine scouting infrastructure execute and front offices operating on gut and noise cannot. 4 picks, 4 players with first-round grades on paper, 2 days of execution that had people questioning whether what they were watching was actually real or whether the draft results were somehow going to be corrected in the morning. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, the reviews were landing very differently. Stefanski was supposed to arrive in his new city as the experienced offensive mind, bringing fresh answers to a franchise that needed direction. New system, new energy, new opportunity to demonstrate that his football philosophy could produce results in a different environment with different resources. That was the narrative around his departure from Cleveland and his arrival in Atlanta, that he was upgrading his situation, moving towards something with more potential, making the smart career move that positioned him for greater success than what Cleveland's circumstances were offering. The draft weekend complicated that narrative significantly. While Cleveland's selections were being praised across platforms, Atlanta's class was drawing the kind of criticism that attaches itself to a coach's name and follows him into the preseason. Mel Kiper weighed in. NFL Network weighed in. Multiple publications weighed in. The consensus that emerged was not about one bad pick or one debatable decision. It was a broader assessment that the Falcons had not maximized the opportunity the draft weekend presented, that the haul did not match the expectations attached to a new coaching staff's first major roster-building event. Coaches noticed this. The competitive instinct that drives successful people to the top of professional sports does not switch off when the subject matter is their former employer doing well. Stefanski watches Cleveland. He tracks the moves. He knows the players, the building, the culture. The specific dynamics that developed during his tenure and the ones that have shifted since his departure. When Cleveland's draft class gets praised league-wide and his new team's draft gets questioned, that information does not sit somewhere neutral in his mind. It lands with the specific weight of a comparison he did not ask for but cannot avoid. The Falcons have talent. They have reasons to believe in their own direction. Stacking Atlanta's draft class against Cleveland's is not a definitive verdict on either franchise's future, but comparisons in the NFL media landscape do not wait for definitive verdicts. They run on first impressions, on immediate reactions, on the gap between expectation and execution measured in real time on social media and sports radio and highlight shows that are already building the narrative before week 1 arrives. The gap right now runs in Cleveland's direction. That gap is going to generate noise that Stefanski hears regardless of how disciplined he is about tuning it out. The timing question is the one that keeps circling back into every honest conversation about what Stefanski's departure means in the context of what Cleveland is building. Because the most uncomfortable version of this story is not that he left a bad situation. It is that he may have left right before the situation started becoming good. Think about the Cleveland Browns as they existed when Stefanski made his exit. Legitimate questions at quarterback, a competition that felt unresolved and potentially unstable regardless of how it concluded. Roster construction concerns that had accumulated over multiple seasons of decisions that did not consistently produce winning football. An organizational culture that needed recalibration at multiple levels. The public perception of a franchise stuck in a cycle that more of the same would not break. Those were real problems. Stefanski's assessment that a change of scenery represented an upgrade was not crazy. Most people looking at the situation from the outside would have made a similar calculation. Reasonable football minds could look at Cleveland's circumstances and conclude that the path forward would be long, difficult, and uncertain in ways that an alternative opportunity might avoid. But reasonable football minds looking at the same circumstances might also notice the specific assets Cleveland had accumulated through the trades and picks that had generated criticism, the future capital that was quietly compounding in Barry's back pocket, while everyone else was focused on the immediate roster picture. They might notice that Todd Monken brought a clarity of direction and a coaching philosophy that addressed several of Cleveland's most persistent organizational problems simultaneously. They might notice that Shedeur Sanders, whatever his limitations as a rookie, showed the specific combination of competitive mentality and processing ability that young quarterbacks who develop into starters tend to show. They might conclude that Cleveland was not a finished product, but was closer to being a finished product than the narrative was acknowledging. And if that conclusion is right, if Cleveland was 2 drafts and 1 aligned coaching staff away from becoming genuinely competitive, then the timing of Stefanski's departure was the specific kind of timing that haunts careers. You can be right about a move and wrong about the moment. That is one of the most expensive mistakes available in professional sports. What Cleveland's draft did beyond adding individual players is harder to quantify, but potentially more significant in terms of competitive impact. It added internal competition across the roster in ways that change how a team prepares and performs at every level of the depth chart. When young, hungry players arrive with something to prove, veterans feel it immediately. The comfortable assumptions about secured roster spots get disrupted. Practice intensity rises because nobody wants to be the established player losing snaps to a rookie who arrived with more energy and less to protect. Meeting rooms sharpen because players who understand their position might be challenged work harder to demonstrate mastery rather than coasting on accumulated experience. The entire temperature of a training camp changes when the depth chart is genuinely unsettled across multiple positions, rather than predetermined by reputation and contract value. That competitive energy is one of the most valuable things a front office can inject into a roster without spending $1 in free agency. It does not show up in highlight clips or draft grade articles. It shows up in how a team looks in August and how it performs in December, in whether the 22nd player on the depth chart is fighting for his roster spot with genuine urgency or managing his position with veteran calculation. The former produces teams that get better as the season progresses. The latter produces teams that plateau in October. Cleveland's young additions create that competitive dynamic at multiple positions simultaneously. Speed in the receiver room that challenges veterans who have been comfortable in their roles. Offensive line depth that makes no assignment permanent. A quarterback room where the competition is being treated as real rather than ceremonial. All of those pressures combine into a locker room energy that coaches describe in terms that sound vague, until you watch 2 teams play in November and wonder why one of them looks like it wants the game more than the other. That energy is already building in Cleveland before a single preseason snap has been taken. Stefanski is trying to install that same energy in a completely new environment with players who are still learning the system, learning each other, and learning what the new coaching staff standards actually mean in practice rather than in theory. That is a longer process. It is achievable. It is just slower. The reputation dimension of what Cleveland is doing right now deserves attention because it operates on a different timeline than wins and losses, but ultimately shapes the competitive landscape in ways that affect roster building for years. Players watch franchise trajectories, not just the headline players negotiating massive contracts with leverage to choose their destinations. The role players, the developmental prospects, the agents advising clients about which situations offer the best chance to succeed and get paid. All of them pay attention to the organizational signals that indicate whether a franchise is trending upward or cycling through the same patterns of dysfunction that have produced losing records for extended stretches. Cleveland's narrative for a significant portion of recent history has been the second version. The organizational problems were visible enough and persistent enough that the franchise carried a reputation that made roster building harder than it needed to be, talented players with options gravitating elsewhere, because the Cleveland situation carried too many question marks to justify the investment of a prime career year. What this draft did, in addition to adding specific players to specific roster positions, is contribute to a narrative shift that changes how the franchise is perceived by the players and agents who make decisions about where careers should develop. A front office that executes a draft weekend like Bari just executed does not look like a franchise in dysfunction. It looks like an organization that has figured something out, that has aligned its scouting, its coaching philosophy, and its roster vision in the specific way that winning organizations align them. That perception change is not instantaneous, and it is not guaranteed, but it begins with exactly the kind of two-day performance Bari just delivered. As Cleveland's reputation shifts from messy situation to interesting destination, the competitive implications accumulate. Better free agency options consider Cleveland where they might have dismissed it before. Draft prospects who have options hear different things from their agents about the organizational culture they are entering. Veterans weighing where to finish their careers look at the trajectory rather than the history. All of those micro-decisions compound over 2 or 3 years into a roster that is harder to build against and harder to beat. Stefanski, working to establish himself in Atlanta, is doing the opposite work simultaneously, trying to build reputation in a new environment from a different starting point, while Cleveland's reputation is improving in his absence. That is not a knockout blow, but it is a sustained headwind that makes his job harder in ways that are difficult to see in April, but become very visible by November. Picture Week 4 of the 2026 NFL season. The Cleveland Browns are 3-1. The young additions are flashing. Casey Compton is doing what Paul Hornung Award winners tend to do when they get into an offense designed to create the mismatches their versatility exploits. Spencer Fano is giving Shedeur Sanders the pocket that allows his processing ability to actually show up as production. The defense is generating the pressure and the turnovers that make 17 points feel like 30 on the scoreboard. The stadium energy has shifted from cautious hope to genuine belief. The Atlanta Falcons are 1-3. The new system is still finding its footing. The questions about consistency that surrounded the roster from the beginning have not yet been answered by results. Stefanski is doing his job, coaching with the precision and the competitiveness that built his reputation, but the results are not yet matching the expectation attached to his arrival. Do you know how loud that conversation becomes? Every sports radio segment in Cleveland is playing theme music. Every national show is building the narrative about the coach who left and the team that thrived. Every social media account with a green and orange profile picture is posting the specific kind of content that lives in sports culture forever. The side-by-side comparison, the ironic hot take, the "we told you" energy of a fan base that has been waiting years for a legitimate reason to believe that their franchise is finally heading somewhere worth going. Stefanski hears all of it. Coaches always hear it. They may discipline themselves not to respond publicly, not to let it affect their preparation or their communication with their players. But it is there, in the background of every week, a persistent reminder that timing matters and that the organization he left behind is making him look like he miscalculated the moment. That is not a certainty. It is a scenario. The season determines which scenarios become stories and which ones stay in the realm of what if. But the fact that the scenario is realistic, that Cleveland has built enough through this draft and this offseason to make a fast start plausible rather than delusional, is itself a significant change from where this franchise was when Stefanski made his exit. The Browns did not just win a draft weekend. They won the narrative battle for the offseason, which in the NFL does not guarantee wins, but absolutely changes the temperature around a franchise in ways that matter for everything that follows. Cleveland went from being the team people mentioned with a smirk and a shrug, the franchise stuck in the same cycle, the quarterback drama that never resolved, the promising pieces that never quite cohered, to being the team that people are leaning forward about. The team analysts are asking serious questions about. The team that might be quietly building something more dangerous than its current reputation suggests. That shift happened because of what Barry did across 2 days. It happened because the picks were right, the values were there, the preparation was evident in how Cleveland capitalized on opportunities the board presented, and the coherent story they told through every selection pointed clearly at an organizational commitment to building around a young quarterback, in a way this franchise has not demonstrated in years. Stefanski wanted a clean break and a fresh start. He got the fresh start, but the clean break may be harder to achieve than he anticipated because the team he left behind is not quietly fading into the background. It is making noise, getting praised, building momentum that travels further and faster than draft grades and April optimism usually travel. If Cleveland starts the season the way this offseason suggests they might, with energy, with youth, with the specific combination of talent and belief and internal competition that produces teams that get better as the year progresses, then the conversation around Kevin Stefanski's departure is going to follow him into November. Not because he is a villain, not because Cleveland's success requires his failure, but because sports is storytelling and this story writes itself. The coach who left, the team that immediately started looking dangerous, the question that will not go away regardless of how many times it gets deflected in press conferences. Did he leave too early? Cleveland is building the argument that the answer might be yes. The 2026 season is where that argument either gets proven or put to rest. And based on everything that happened in that draft room over 2 days, the argument is a lot stronger than anyone expected it to be when Stefanski got on the plane to Atlanta.